This is Product Management, the podcast powered by Alpha. Welcome. We feature the brightest minds across the numerous disciplines that fuel modern product teams. Join over 15,000 weekly listeners to learn from product leaders, authors, and founders from companies such as Adobe, Shopify, Viacom, Under Armour, and many more. They'll share their insights and best practices for experimentation, user research, leadership, corporate innovation, and more. To receive updates on the latest episodes of this show, subscribe to our weekly newsletter at thisisproductmanagement.com. To learn more about Alpha, the platform that has powered thousands of product experiments for the world's leading brands, visit alphahq.com.
Hey, I'm your host, Mike Fishbein. Welcome back. On this episode, I'll be speaking with Michel Pfister, co-founder and CEO of UserMind, an enterprise software company in Seattle. She'll share her approach to creating and conquering a new product category and how she sets priorities when managing a portfolio of products.
My name is Michel Pfister. I'm the founder and CEO of an enterprise SaaS startup called UserMind. And maybe kind of 2 minutes on my background. I spent 20 years in enterprise software, almost all of that in the product management discipline. So I'm kind of uniquely a product-oriented founder. And I've spent my life building software categories. So, the title of our episode today is Conquering a Category is Product Management. And it's something that I deeply believe and think is very strategic to enterprise software.
Michel has spent 20 years in enterprise product management at both startups and large companies and is now the CEO of the company she co-founded. How did she get her start in product management, and what have been her most significant accomplishments up until now?
I spent 20 years in enterprise software, so I'm a kind of a classic software geek. I dropped out of college. I dropped out of Harvard when I was 18. Got really lucky, ended up working in a convenience store business for years and years, and pretty much learned everything I know about managing people there. But got my break at a company called CompuWare into technology. This is kind of 98. It's in the boom. There weren't enough technology people, and so got, kind of recruited in there and literally learned everything, coding, my first time using email, you name it. And I spent maybe the first kind of 4 years of my chapter in tech in pre-sales in the field, but got really lucky. So both at CompuWare and then I went to a company called Mercury Interactive. I worked really, really closely with the product management organization. I ended up, handling customers in New England. That's where I lived, like GE and Fidelity. And so these customers were always pushing us, not just for kind of the technology today, but wanting to really develop a 3-year or multi-year roadmap with us. And so, that was really kind of how I got connected into the product management organization for the first time, largely as a voice of the customer and kind of what I was hearing from the field. And the more I engaged, the more excited I became. I was really involved in an acquisition at Mercury of a company called Quintana, and ultimately ended up asking a mentor of mine, I think someday I want to run my own company. What's your advice? And Zohar said to me, either go into product management or go into sales. I was always much more excited about kind of building product necessarily than closing deals. And so I got the opportunity to then move into product management. My first job was PM of a product called Load Runner. So my first job was product managing a product line that already was at $300 million in revenue, highly functional. Customers loved it. We were first in the market. We had 70% market share. My first PM role, I had no idea what PM was, but I really had the luxury of a lot of data and was able to apply, learn a lot and really apply a lot of great customer development techniques to kind of cut my teeth. And kind of ended up PMing every Mercury testing product. We got acquired by HP Software, which was a sad day, but that opened kind of my next chapter in my product life. I took over a business called Data Center Automation, ended up acquiring a company called Opsware, which has since become famous because the founders of that company were Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz, who've gone on to found the darling venture capital firm, Andreessen Horowitz. Literally, I left there and went to my first startup. And so I got the opportunity to run product at a startup. I joined at 17 people and stayed through 500. And that was my first real learning experience on SaaS product management, which I think is pretty different from kind of old school, on-prem product management. And, then 4 years ago, I left and founded my own company. And literally everything I've done here is product focused. I started the company by interviewing 400 people. And now it's 4 years later, and I have raised 22 million, and we've got a couple million in ARR, and are a real enterprise software company. So my life has certainly been quite a journey, but at the heart of my success and kind of my core skill set is really building products that customers love and get value out of. So not much I'm more passionate about than product management.
Michel dropped out of college at 18 and eventually landed her first PM job managing a product line that was already generating $300 million in revenue. After that company was acquired by HP, she joined a startup that she helped grow from 17 to 500 people. Her current company, UserMind, has raised $22 million and is generating a couple million in ARR. I asked Michel about how conquering a category factors into her product strategy.
So a category is a term that analysts use, analysts like Gartner and Forrester and Ovum, and they use it to define market spaces. And a space is basically a problem that a customer has that they're willing to spend money on, and that usually has an associated set of vendors and a TAM, a total addressable market. When you look at categories, they're largely defined by analysts. So a customer doesn't just go out, or a vendor doesn't just go out and invent one. You have to really persuade these influencers in the market that these categories exist. And the reason you want to persuade them is that the vast majority of IT buying is influenced by analysts. So when people, start a process of buying their next, you name it, monitoring tool, project management tool, in many cases, they go out and they consult with experts. And those experts advise them on the right companies to talk to and approaches to take. And so really a category is a lens on the market. And I love them because if you can create a new one, you reset the price point. You invent a space where money moves there, you're setting the value anew, and of course you have the opportunity to be a market leader. It's really hard in some cases to kind of disrupt from nothing an existing space, although that's been done. By going after a greenfield market and trying to create a new category, you can really establish yourself as a market leader from day one, even though it can take a long time to do it. That's kind of really what the basics of a category are. You know you're successful when an analyst writes a wave or a magic quadrant, or they start actually tracking the category and tracking ideally you and writing about you as the leader. And the reason you want to do it is that usually the category king becomes the number one vendor in the market, because the vast majority of the market, early majority, late majority, and laggards, they're buying what people recommend to them to buy. That's why the category matters so much. And of course, we all know that if you're a software company, essentially the number one and number two players in the market make all the money. And the long tail of companies that tried to solve that problem and didn't succeed aren't that successful. So if you're building a software company, you very much want to be number one or number two. I believe that it's easier to do that when you set out in a green field than when you're in a brown field. That's what a category is.
Michel has given an overview of what a category is and why it's so important to lead one. A category represents a problem that a customer has and is willing to spend money on. You know you're successful at creating a category when analysts start covering it. It's critical to then conquer that category because the number one and number two companies in the category usually make all the money. How does she approach building and managing a portfolio of products to conquer a market?
I'll give examples from my time at both Mercury and my time at HP. But when I was at Mercury, we were in the testing business. And when you sold customers testing products, you had multiple discrete products that they could potentially buy from you. So we had functional testing tool WinRunner, and we had a performance testing tool LoadRunner, and we had a test management suite called Test Director. And so when you really won the whole QA team, you won kind of that department of people, and they were using Mercury. Ideally, they were using all of our products integrated together into a suite. When you think about that, that's a portfolio of products. And it's pretty common that companies start out with one product that they are successful on, and that same buyer can then buy other products. And so you line extend, right? Same buyer, more products. So that's really the natural reason why you build a portfolio is, in an ideal world, you're taking advantage of other pains the same buyer has. And we all know that basically there's two problems in enterprise software. There's building the right product and there's selling it effectively. Generally speaking, portfolios or suites of products emerge because you want to sell more stuff to the same buyer rather than go have to figure out how to sell to a different buyer. You go from having one product like LoadRunner to multiples, and it's designed to kind of win all the money. So instead of selling to the functional tester, now you're selling to the QA director, right? And you're selling them a suite of technology. So that's an example of a portfolio of products. The second kind of one that I managed was similar idea. When I took over Acquired Opsware, that was service automation. And the idea was it was a suite of technologies to automate the data center. So server automation, network automation, storage automation, and runbook automation. Generally, in enterprise software, it might start with a point solution, but over time you grow a suite. Portfolio or suite, that's really kind of the terminology that you'd use. I think it's actually a harder product problem. So when you think about your product manager of an individual product, you're managing your resources and you're investing your engineering into the specific features that you want to drive. And to some extent, you're prioritizing, but you have to learn to do the same thing at the suite level. So, questions you have to ask yourself is, how do I allocate my engineering resources? Am I going to, and I'm not a fan of peanut buttering, but do I want all of my resources on one of those? Am I sunsetting something? And so there's this kind of notion, I call it a resource pie, of looking at your suite and saying, in order to win as a suite, I might have different priorities than in order to win as a product. And those two things are in conflict. So I might need 10 more engineers to really be amazing at functional testing. But the reality is that that's not really going to win me the next $1 million deal. In order to win the $1 million deal, I need a bunch of things in my test management platform. It's very similar to kind of the prioritization that's done within a single product, but it's often much harder because you're now moving one level up into go-to-market strategy. And so you're asking yourself at that portfolio level, what are the competitive dynamics? What is the go-to-market dynamic? What are the things that are going to make me the most money? Where do I have technical debt? Where do I have customer sat problems? It's also a people problem because if you're the leader of a team and you own that whole suite of products, you have to manage also kind of the interpersonal dynamics that you're not going to give each product manager of each product everything that they want. And so to me, this is really the challenge of portfolio management. And my experience is it's hard to find a great product manager. It's just as hard to find a great product line manager.
Building a portfolio of products enables you to sell more stuff to the same buyers, as opposed to having to find more buyers. The challenge in managing a portfolio is that you have to prioritize and allocate resources at the portfolio level as opposed to the product level, Michel says. I asked her how she makes strategic decisions in this context.
Both portfolio and product decisions, I use kind of a 4-quadrant framework that I believe in. So when I think about where I'm investing my engineering resources, I look at quadrant 1 is sales, right? What do I need to win deals? Quadrant 2 is compete or disruption. Either is there a competitor that's killing me with some feature, or is there some big disruption? Mobile's emerging. And if I don't do something, that could put my business at risks. So there's kind of sales quadrant, there's risk quadrant, there's time to value. In many cases in the enterprise, there's features you need to accelerate delivering the implementation for customer success or for services. And so you'll have a set of time to value features that you need, which could be a very big financial problem at scale. I put kind of the last bucket is what I call keep the lights on. So that's investments that might be investments in anything from platform, fixing technical debt, or investing in perf and scale, or it could be a bunch of little nit features that your power users want. But when I look at, by the way, whether it's product, I'm just looking at a single product, or I'm looking at my overall product line, I'm trying to assess at this point in my product maturity, which of those is the most important thing? Because at the end of the day, that's the lens that matters. By the way, this is you could do this for every sprint, you can do it for every quarter, but what you're trying to do is balance risk and opportunity. And so if you think about it in what I described, there's basically risk, disruption, compete, or KTLO, right? My system just doesn't work well enough or my customers aren't happy. And there's offense. I'm delivering time to value faster at lower cost, and I'm more features to win more deals. And so I think that's the meta question you always have to be asking yourself. And I think a lot of it depends on where you are in your product lifecycle. So I think if you're early on in a product lifecycle, quite often we find that there's a lot more focus on closing deals. And the larger your customer base, the more important KTLO and kind of time to value concerns become, because your business, you might be closing tons of deals, but your customers aren't renewing because it takes too long to get value, or their power users are really pissed off and not happy. And so to me, you got to step back and map the technology to that business landscape. And at any given point in time, you might have to hard right turn your product strategy because something changed about your business reality. And I think, by the way, that's often one of the challenges. I say a bad product manager. So I always know a bad product manager. I ask them, okay, you went to a customer and you interviewed them. Great. What did they tell you? And I hear from the bad product manager, well, they gave me this list of features that they want. And what I'm looking for in a good product manager is they're listening for the set of problems the customer had. And so I think like at the product management, like individual product, I'm just figuring out what to build. A bad product manager is basically building what people ask for, and a great one is finding patterns of problems and finding innovative solution to those problems. When I look at a portfolio manager or even like a more strategic, director of product management, I'm asking myself, do they understand the relationship between those features and their business risks and goals? And that's that resource pie I'm describing to you. And to me, that's the difference between, I would expect a product manager to be able to think about problems. I expect the director of product management to be able to trade off between those quadrants of opportunity in their product. And a VP of product, I would expect to be able to manage a product line and think strategically about those trade-offs. And so I guess the answer to your question, which isn't that helpful, is how much you're investing in any one quadrant is a function of the state of your business. So, if you ask me, if I looked at, for example, when I took over LoadRunner, I'll give a couple specific examples. We were going through, that was basically in the emergence of web, I'm dating myself now, as a gigantic technology. And so there was a whole paradigm shift about, without going into too many technical details, do we build a new, more modern recording technology in LoadRunner because 99% of our people are non-web and we want to get to a less technical performance testing user? And so we had a lot of questions about, there's this risk angle, the web is disrupting, so how do we win the web? But the larger implication was that there'd be more performance testing and we might have many more non-technical people doing performance testing. And so if you think about that, that's a set of product questions that lead to your product strategy and where you're investing. And it's very much a risk from a new technology point of view. It related to selling, but it wasn't sales features. And it was very much about time to value because our persona was changing. That's, to me, the best product leaders and thinkers can switch from that business lens to the implications on their product features and trade-offs. Likewise, when I took over Opsware, it was very interesting. So when I led that acquisition, at the time, now there's a category called service automation. At the time, that was not the case. And our vision was that, it kind of seems obvious now, people don't want to deploy servers, they want to deploy services, right? They want to deploy applications end to end. And so our theory was that we could drive the analysts to build and think differently about these config management products, that we want to go evangelize to enterprises that they should buy a unified suite, because no one's really just managing servers, we're managing these applications. And so you need this suite of technologies to automate those deployments end to end. And when you're thinking about that strategy, your question is, well, which products are most important? Where does my overall thrust of my engineering need to go? What's the key technologies we have to win? And some of that's your competitive landscape. So at the time, Opsware was competing with Blade Logic, which didn't have a suite, but probably had a better server automation technology. From our point of view, when I looked at that kind of overall portfolio, I took over that team, we doubled down on fixing server automation because we felt it was too much of a risk. We had to be close enough that our suite argument would win and neutralize that their server automation technology was somewhat better as a product. And so that's the same argument I just made you from a product point of view, only now I'm applying that lens to my suite. And so that's, to me, this idea of I think about it as my grid, right? It's selling, risks, which could be compete or it could be technology disruption, time to value, and KTLO. And if you understand where the risks and opportunities are in your business, then you can ensure that you're investing the right amount of engineering in each area. And doing so and constantly changing that resource pie, really. I often tell people that resources are strategy. My single great principle of product management is that your product management strategy is not what you say, it's what your engineers are doing. And so managing the investment of your resources against these features and initiatives is your strategy, regardless of what you say. And making sure you keep alignment between what the people are actually coding and building features on and the overall kind of business risk and opportunity picture of the company is one of the most important ways product managers help companies succeed, right? Not just products succeed.
Michel uses a 4-quadrant framework for making decisions that takes into account sales, risk, time to value, and keeping the lights on. I asked her about the unique leadership and management challenges associated with managing a portfolio of products and what's most contributed to her success in this role.
You have to remember that there's a human implication to these resource pie decisions that you make. And so I'll give a personal example. So when I went into product management at the time within Mercury, testing was the largest business by revenue, but our goal was to build 2 new businesses at the time. So we were going into a market, we were going into basically monitoring and competing with BMC and HP in the enterprise monitoring space. And we were opening up another area of competition called IT governance, which was in the project and portfolio management space. And some of that was organic development and some of that was acquisitions that we'd done. But the company was in a transformation from being a pure testing company to really trying to be end-to-end IT management company and just trying to grow into competing against CA, BMC, and HP. So I'll give you in that context, although testing was the most profitable business and certainly had the most revenue, on a year-over-year basis, we were really starved for resources. So despite our growth in customers and, in fact, our growth in revenue, at the leadership level, there was a very, very clear focus that we were going to put all the new engineering heads driven by growth into our emerging businesses because that was the future of Mercury. I call that out because, man, was that hard for me as a first-time PM where, I've got LoadRunner and I have all these ideas. And, we always know that the things we want to do, we never have enough engineering to do all the things that we want to do. It's always impossible for a product manager. I've never met a product manager for whom the world of product possibility wasn't 5x more than what they had the engineering resources to do. And so I think we underestimate the human and leadership challenges required to basically explain and align and motivate the team because and now I understand it, right? Now I'm many years removed from that scenario and I fully understand and I admire the decision making. I mean, the level of courage it takes to make those kinds of hard calls is what drove Mercury's success. But as the receiver of that was hugely challenging for me. And it was demotivating actually to the engineering team and I remember we'd fight for like one engineer and be a huge victory. The encouragement I give people is that although you're managing the resource pie and it is a very abstract thing, ultimately it's expressed through people. And so when you make these changes of saying, look, we're going to double down on one team and not on another, or we're going to pivot the entire team, we're going to go to a product organization, a product team, and we're going to say extreme things. I'm going to sunset this old product and build a new one. We're going to stop working on these features and start working on others. There's a lot of human collateral to that. And I'll give you examples. So the PMs will be pissed off that PM A got 10 new resources and they got 2. So within the product organization, you're going to have tension. In engineering, you're going to have tensions because you're going to take people and put them on the cool new project, and you're going to have other engineers who are working on boring stuff, small features, bugs, escalations, KTLO. And so I think the underestimated aspect of in larger companies, I think at startups, we're all a little more externally focused, but there can just be a lot of human leadership issues created by these decisions. I'm a super big believer that you've got to be completely transparent and you can't sugarcoat some of these decisions, but ultimately the people who are executing these strategies can take your decisions very personally. So you have to actually lead people through the strategy you've chosen and the why, because quite often they don't really fully understand. All they know is now they're having to work on stuff they don't like working on, or they think something's really important and the company's not funding it. So they think you as leaders are stupid. And so to me, that's kind of the thing I would encourage more senior product leaders who are probably acutely aware of this, but there's a tremendous amount of organizational alignment and leadership required as you change strategy, both at the product and portfolio level, and we shouldn't underestimate that. The other strategy I would say that I believe in is probably most contributed to my success is I'm super anti-peanut buttering. So we all have heard the term in product management, peanut buttering your resources, right? We have 4 initiatives and we put 2 people on each initiative. And we kind of don't really win at anything. And so I think if I've had great success, and I feel like I've had good success over the years, although I'm constantly learning, probably more aware of my own mistakes than I am always cognizant of my own successes. The one principle to me of great product management is commitment. It is so much worse to do 4 features badly than to do 1 all in and amazing. The greatest enemy of great, whether it's product strategy or product features, is a little too much peanut buttering. I would prioritize fewer things and do them better. And to me, like that example I gave you at Mercury where they just went all in and said, nope, we're going to starve this business of resources. That's a great example of not peanut buttering. And again, now I see it with kind of more years of experience. Wasn't enjoyable to be on the receiving end of, but it was a core part of Mercury's growth from being pretty tactical QA testing vendor to being a very strategic vendor in the service management space. And it's very hard. Kudos to the leaders. That requires so much guts. Successful PMs make the hard calls and they do fewer things better, and they take the pain and the heat of saying no to all these other things. That's a hallmark of actually landing things that really move the needle.
Michel emphasizes the human element of making resource allocation decisions. It takes courage to make these hard calls because it can demoralize a product manager to lose resources or have their product shut down. How does she incorporate M&A into her strategy for conquering a category?
One of the things I always tell people, I'm a huge fan of Sun Tzu, ancient Chinese military strategist. And one of the things Sun Tzu said is, know yourself and know your enemy, and you'll be victorious in 1,000 battles. And so the first thing I would say about M&A is, know whether M&A is something you can pull off and do, and then only do the kinds of M&A that you can be successful at. And I'll try and make that more concrete. I have been acquired and I have led acquisitions. And so let me give you my example of the OpsWare acquisition. So I took over this data center automation business, which at the time, I think we had a couple hundred engineers working on at HP. And they had made a couple acquisitions. They acquired a company called Radia. They acquired a company called AppIQ, and had really not been successful at turning these companies into a really dominant force in the company. So they had, I don't know how much they spent, but had really achieved, if you looked at the market, all these engineers were basically getting us to like 5th or 6th in the market position. So you're talking about a very small business, 25 million or something in revenue, which for a company like HP is a rounding error. And from my point of view, when you think about M&A, thing one is like, who are you as a company? And when I looked at HP is a channel company. So HP was not going to innovate its way to success. So when I looked at that market, I took it over and I said, well, gosh, we've got all these engineers. We've done a lot of M&A, but we're 5th in the market. And by the way, the top 3 providers, this was OpsWare, BladeLogic, and IBM, had 80% market share. So like, what's the odds that we're going to organically just grind our way to innovate in this market and go from being 6th to 1st? Highly unlikely. And why is it highly unlikely? Well, one, the market's already consolidated. So like one question on M&A is, where is the market? The market's consolidated. Generally, M&A is something, big M&A is more likely to be successful, right? Because you have to move the needle. If you're going to do M&A, you don't want to go from 6 to 5. You want to go from 5 to 1 to be worth the execution risk. The second thing is, know who you are. So when you think then, if you're HP, we had kind of 2 choices. We could have gone out and done a bunch of little M&As. They're called tuck-ins. Tuck-in is I go buy a company for $2 million, $3 million, a tiny acquisition. And basically a tuck-in is I'm acquiring technology. And by the way, this is something startups often do very well. Small companies are often very good at acquiring technology because their entire company is focused on selling one thing, and you add in a small capability and you can get into the channel really effectively. At HP, we sold so many products that if you bought a little tuck-in, it's like noise. There's no way you're going to train 5,000 salespeople on that feature. It's just too small to rise to the level of something. So you really can't be successful in monetizing it. The last kind of part is when you look at HP, like what is it really good at? It was really good at taking businesses probably that were greater than 100 million in revenue, where the product worked, you knew how to sell it, and it was like a big channel. And you could take this very working thing, put it in the channel, and it'd grow magically like 500%. So to me, that's when I say, know yourself. So I think your M&A options are very driven by who are you as the acquirer. Are you a startup? Are you doing a tuck-in? Are you a big enterprise? You better buy something that's channel ready. And so I think like, who are you? What's the market dynamics? These are just giant considerations in terms of what kind of M&A you're going to go execute. And then I'll tell you one other thing we thought about in the Opsware acquisition. So Opsware versus BladeLogic. So the number one player in the market, Opsware, had a suite of products. BladeLogic was really only one product, server automation, and they had partnerships. And so the other thing we considered was execution risk. So would we be more successful at buying one big company that had already done the acquisition integration than doing 5 acquisitions? And from my point of view, it was a no-brainer. Like, you look at the success of the HP software integrations. By the way, I came into HP by being acquired, so I'd just been through it. And I just thought that HP was unlikely to be successful to do 5. So to me, when you look at the net out of Opsware, we felt we had to win the market. We felt like we had to be number 1 or number 2 in that space. We had to own it. We weren't likely to organically execute our way from number 6 to number 1. And then when you look at the landscape, it didn't seem to me like we'd be that successful going after 5 small companies. We'd be better off buying one leader and putting it into our channel, because that would be the highest likelihood of success, even if we paid a premium. And in fact, we paid $600 million over what BladeLogic sold for. No, $800 million. We did pay a significant premium over what BMC paid for their acquisitions they did to counter HP. But I would argue that that premium more than made up for the reduced execution risk that we got. And so that's just one example. M&A is kind of a very complicated thought process. But, to me, it all starts with, do I have to win this market? If I do have to win this market, where is my current market position? And what are my options to go win the market? And I think it's in that lens that you look at M&A. And then you're kind of thinking about, well, am I buying a technology? Some new technology is emerging and I need just a little technology to complete my product. Or am I buying a business? And then kind of once you've made those determinations, now you can look at the portfolio of things that you have out there. And then once you've kind of figured out your targets, then the question is kind of cost benefit ratio. And, what does it cost me to acquire this? And what's the likelihood of my ability to execute it to get this initial outcome I described? So I think the actual M&A scenarios are very different, but if you looked at that process I just described, you probably would execute a similar process in every situation. You just would end up with a different outcome because you're starting from a different starting point.
Citing Sun Tzu, Michel encourages product leaders to start by knowing themselves and their competition. Then execute the M&A deals that you can successfully integrate. I asked her what it takes to be successful in enterprise product management as compared to consumer product management.
I've only ever done enterprise, and I love enterprise software. And part of why I love enterprise software is that it's the opposite of what you might expect. So I find consumer software product management is less personal. You have a very large volume of users, and you use a lot of data-driven techniques and a lot of probably A/B testing to optimize. And the other thing about consumer that I've observed is that consumer is very binary. So you're either Instagram or you're dead. There's very little middling success. You either become a viral hit and you're giant, or you're just get no traction and you die. Enterprise doesn't look like that at all. So enterprise is, number one, very personal, because although you're selling to companies, you're actually selling to a very specific persona and buyer at every company. You generally get to know those people very, very well, because what drives product feature decisions isn't just, can I get incrementally more engagement with a feature, and does the consumer get delighted? Consideration in enterprise is, what is that person, my sponsor, my buyer, who do they report to, and what are their MBOs? And what technology changes are happening in enterprise that are affecting them? I find one of the things I love about enterprise is that the sales process is very complicated. You often have many people who influence your sales process. Therefore, what's required to win enterprise is more complicated, because you're not just delighting me with Uber. You might need to sell 5 or 6 stakeholders to get your deal done. And so when you're building your product in enterprise, you often have to think of multiple personas, buying personas and user personas. And that, I think that has a level of complexity that is just greater than building a consumer product. The flip side is you can fly and visit and get to know each of those people and do unstructured interviews and mine gold from them. And I think there's fewer great enterprise product managers. So it's harder. You can't just get the data. You have to go talk to people. A lot of times you're going to find out that their boss has some net new initiative that they're focused on, And it's like that one comment in that interview that shapes the entire product strategy because you heard everyone's doing Kubernetes now from 3 people. And so you smelled it a year ahead of somebody else. So to me, that very personal multi-persona aspect of product management is extremely different. The other kind of 2 differences is that when you implement the software, you have many more personas. You build features for pre-sales, people who are selling the software to do POCs. You build features for services to implement the software. And so I think there's a lot more user complexity as well in enterprise software development, which I just have a lot of passion around. I think that's very enjoyable to try and understand all these people and figure out how to make them successful. I personally like the fact that when you build an enterprise software product, you're sending somebody home earlier to play with their kids, or you're saving them a ton of time. And so while it is companies, I find it very, very much about the actual people that work in those companies. That's very, very motivating to me personally. I think, the level of complexity in both the number of people who use it, the number of people, the supply chain in the company, right? The number of people you have to train, services, pre-sales. It creates a level of complexity for the product manager that I think is just materially different than product management on the consumer side. The other thing I'll tell you is I think that enterprise is more of a grind. So I definitely feel like consumer is binary. You either get it right and you're super successful. And I personally, do we know why? How many photo sharing apps were there? Like, why did Instagram win? I don't really know. I think, why did Pinterest and not something else? I think sometimes it's hard to tell in retrospect with consumer why one became a unicorn and why one didn't. I do feel like enterprise is more of a grind, which means you can start off and you don't know everything about what you're building. And if you get the right 20 customers, they will lead you in the right direction if you listen to them. And you need the right ones. You need to know who are the visionaries. But I also think that that's a very fascinating aspect of enterprise. Enterprise takes 7 to 10 years to IPO a company. You can build a unicorn and consumer in 4. The beauty there is you can be wrong and still win an enterprise, initially wrong, because you can actually work very closely with these people to help them solve their problem and get righter over time. I guess at the end of the day, I love that interpersonal interaction. I love being able to iterate with the same group of people and over time look back and think, gosh, we got it. Now we finally built that enterprise platform. And maybe the last data point I'll give you is the numbers are really different. So when you're starting a company, it's a startup and you're building an enterprise software product, I did, 300-400 interviews, but in the first 2 years, I got 10 customers on the platform. Consumer, you're talking about, if you're successful, millions. That's why qualitative versus quantitative. I feel like in early enterprise software product development, you need a lot more qualitative feedback because you don't have the scale to get quantitative feedback. And so the way you make decisions, I think, is just very, very different. That is either you love it or you hate it. I happen to personally very much love that. And I think that's why, you need a lot more of these frameworks and kind of tools to help you think in an environment that's data poor.
Michel has shared her strategy for creating and conquering a category. Make decisions at the portfolio level that take into account sales, risk, time to value, and keeping the lights on. Make acquisitions that you're fit to integrate, and work to gain a deep understanding of your buyer's problems. Next up is the benchmark. Let's hear how Michel reflects on the next series of questions we ask all interviewees to ask themselves.
What's the best way to learn more about conquering a category? I'd recommend 2 books. So one, I'm a huge fan of Crossing the Chasm. The most important first thing is where are you in category development? That's probably the best book out there to get that set of resources. The other book I'd recommend is Play Bigger by Chris Lochhead. That was a set of people who helped us design the category at Mercury BTO. And they're probably the best 360-degree thinkers because a category isn't really just about product. A category is about the world accepting your idea as a way to think about the market. And so I think to be a great PM and build a category, you need to both build a product strategy. Crossing the Chasm is the best book there. And then, know how to create the category. And so for that, I'd recommend Play Bigger. How do I get out of the office? I just spend all my time in the field. To me, the answer is get somebody, ask them for a coffee, Generally, the way I conduct my interviews is a combination of what I call structured and unstructured conversation. So if I was going to a customer, and let's say I'm going to give you two examples. Let's say I'm early in the product development cycle, 10 questions to every customer, all the same. And then I ask them a lot about their reporting structure and their boss, because I find people are most motivated by making their bosses happy. So that's kind of like early customers. If it's an established product, I make them present first, because if you ask them, you lead the witness. And so best for a mature product, best tip I would give you is make the customer tell you their point of view first, and then lead them down your roadmap and questions. Otherwise, you'll never get their candid feedback. What am I reading or listening to right now? Maybe the only podcast I listen to is Glide, which is a church. That's kind of my getting recentered podcast. So probably that'd be my answer. I do that on a Sunday when I walk my dogs. I listen to the previous Sunday's sermon. It reminds me of what really matters in the world. What new product have I been using outside of work? Actually, I'm like a super laggard. I guess I've just discovered Waze. I've been using Google Maps for 10 years. And I downloaded Waze, and now I've completely switched over to Waze because I think it's just much more interesting, even if I actually don't think it's faster, because it's the same company now. I like all the data that it gives me. So that just tells you that I'm not an early adopter of anything.
Listeners can learn more about Michel's company, Usermind, at usermind.com. That's our show. Until next time, this is Mike Fishbein from Alpha. If you enjoy the show, I encourage you to go beyond iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud and subscribe on our website, thisisproductmanagement.com. Every Monday, you'll get an email from me with the latest episode, exclusive product management resources, discounts to conferences, and opportunities to ask future guests a question that will be aired on the show. Visit thisisproductmanagement.com to subscribe.